Hi everyone, how are you doing today? It is a gray evening here, and I have had this review in mind for a while, for a week or two, but just now I've got around to filming this video, and I guess my feelings about it are not quite as fresh as they were, but fortunately I did write a book review of it, and so this video will be based on that review. So if you've already read it, I'm sorry for regurgitating what I've written on my blog, but I did want to share it in a video format because this book, or these poems that I read specifically, were profoundly impactful on me this year. And for those of you who don't know, yes, I do write a blog. It's called classicsconsidered.com, and I don't just review classics anymore, although that's the primary focus, but similarly to this YouTube channel, I also cover some modern literature, some history, some nonfiction, all that stuff. So anyways, just a quick ad for the blog. But yeah, I wanted to talk about these poems and just kind of explain why I think they are worth reading, and just different connections that they brought to mind. So this collection, I think I've shown in a previous video, this is the selected poems of Rainer Maria Rilke, and I came across Rilke, well, I've known about him for quite a few years, but I stumbled upon him again recently as I was scrolling Instagram. Not the most illustrious way to find a new book, but I follow these publishers, and they had just recently announced a new collection of his poetry, translated by Jeffrey Lehman, and I think it just came out a few days ago. When I saw the post, it had not been released yet, but essentially the poem they featured for this was The Swan, and I was just very struck by both the imagery and the emotions in this short little poem. And the lines that really, I think, grabbed me were these three lines. So in Lehman's translation, it reads, "Our uncompleted lives, this struggling on, relentless as though our limbs have all been bound, is like the awkward waddle of the swan." And then in a few more lines, he talks about the swan gently going into the water, and it's basically a metaphor for death, but not just death in this grim, morbid way or spooky way. It's more about thinking of it as a gentle transition, a gentle release, if you will. Life not being necessarily this horrible, dark, grim thing, but the awkward waddle of a swan. It's got its ups and downs and its beauties and tragedies alike. So I was just so struck by that, and I couldn't wait for that book to be released, so I tried to find another collection as soon as I could and ended up picking up this Oxford World Classics edition. I don't think you can really go wrong with these. I'm a little bit biased because I've been reading these since uni and I just love them so much, but they typically have very good translations and very good endnotes, to help explain things, and that's particularly important with Rilke. I think it would be a grave mistake to pick up a collection of his writing that doesn't have any endnotes, because, as I'll get to in a minute, there's just so much to learn, basically, as you're reading it. So, but let me talk about the Duino Elegies in particular. So, this is a series of 10 poems, 10 elegies that he wrote, and it was over a course of about 10 years. This is actually the bilingual edition here. But so he started these poems in 1912. He was staying at this beautiful castle called Duino Castle on the rocky wooded coastline of Italy. And he was staying there with a friend of his. I believe the friend owned the place. Friends in high places. And so, he felt inspired to write this as he was walking along the beach and heard words in the air, it's mysterious words, and that's what started it. But he actually didn't finish it until about 10 years later, when he heard about a friend's young daughter who passed away. So that was the catalyst to finishing them. 10 years. But absolutely gorgeous poems, and the beginning is extremely evocative. It starts out, "Who, if I cried out, would hear me among the orders of angels, and even if one should suddenly hold me to his heart, I would fade back, touching his intenser existence. For beauty is nothing but the beginning edge of the dread we may barely endure, object of our awe, because it serenely disdains to annihilate us. Every angel is dread." And I will get to that in a minute. Like, what is he talking about here? What's the angels? What's the dread? But I just wanted to kind of highlight a couple things here about the style and the type of poetry this is. As you can see, it is free verse, but it has, at least in this translation, it's just a beautiful melodic quality to it, and this unending, relentless yearning / melancholy. Understandable, because these are elegies, but throughout these elegies, there's this back and forth, this tension, tug of war between belonging and alienation. I love this piece here. This is from the 4th elegy. And he says, "And you too, all who loved me for my slight incipient love, a love for you I always turned away from, because the space I saw within your faces changed when I loved it into cosmic space where you no longer were." And I think, added to, this isn't just a simple, oh, I'm sad, I'm depressed, I'm lonely. He's really drawing upon perspective here, and how things look different from different perspectives. And one of the ways he does this is the use of these, I'd say they're personas or metaphorical characters, like the angels. That's kind of the framework for these elegies. There's layers upon layers of meaning. So before I get into that further, I will say I found 3 ways to read these elegies. You can kind of read it, like on a surface level, a meditative reading. You just absorb the words and emotions on the page. And sometimes that's hard with a translation, but I felt this translation was well suited to it. And there were times I did just kind of read it like that, because, it's poetry. And sometimes when there's a lack of understanding, you've just got to try and feel what he's getting at. A second way to read this, though, and one I did strive for, because I'm just kind of like always curious, always digging. So a second way of reading this is a more analytical or literary reading. And you'll notice a lot of asterisks scattered throughout these poems, because there's tons of endnotes explaining what he means by this term or that term, or what this is a reference to, or what Greek myth is he referring to, with these very subtle choices of language. He's very, very subtle. So a lot of scholarship has been done to unpack his references and his meaning and uncode all of that. So again, good to get these kinds of editions where people have done that work for you. And actually, I found it very helpful to go back and keep a bookmark in the endnotes and read them before I read each elegy. Now that might sound like a ton of work, and I guess it was, but I got so much more out of it that way, so that instead of the reading getting broken up as I was going, I read the endnotes, I got a bit of context, and then reading through the poem, I had that information in the back of my mind. I was like, oh yeah, okay, I get where he's going here. Okay, so third way to read these is a philosophical reading. So similarly to a literary reading, if you are clever enough and have done enough study here, you can actually start to construct some idea of his outlook on the world, his metaphysical ideas, and his brand of, I would say, existentialism that he's describing in these 10 elegies. I didn't quite get there, honestly, but I think it's there. It's just I'm not quite well up enough on philosophy to manage it. However, that being said, there is a fourth way of reading this, and I guess as a Christian, I was just inherently drawn to this reading, which is a religious reading. Now, I will say that I don't think it was intended to be read that way as such. And what I mean by that is these are very spiritual poems. They are highly spiritual. I mean, it was a very moving experience to read them, and I was just touched on such a core level as I was reading these. I mean, just moved to tears, honestly. But the way his spiritual language and convictions are conveyed in these is not within the framework of any, well, shall we say, established religion. So let me get into that here. And I did a little bit of reading in the back about this as well with those endnotes, but found some essays to kind of fill in the gaps. Well, one essay in particular, which I'll get to in a minute. But going back to the angels, so it would be a mistake to think of them as biblical angels. That was not Rilke's intent. He wrote a letter to his Polish translator and told him that his angels are not Christian angels. They're inspired by Islamic angels, but not really that either. The editor of this book puts it as, quote, transcendent beings of perfect consciousness, beyond time, beyond the limitations of physicality, representations of the most intense beauty. And in Rilke's own words, the angel of the elegies is that being which guarantees the recognition of a higher degree of reality in the realm of the invisible. It is therefore terrible to us, because we who love and transform it still cling to the visible. So, you know, in a more dumbed down version, you can think of these angels as representing this perfect freedom, this transcendence above what we see and what we experience, this incredible beauty and just exhilaration. But it's terrifying because we are physical beings, we are earthly beings, and we are not able to grasp that. And it might seem a bit esoteric and, you know, just a bit detached from, you know, everyday life, never mind Christianity. So I would agree with that. I think that being said, as a Christian, I was able to connect it with my own faith in ways that I found very illuminating. And yeah, I'll get into that in a minute. But I want to talk about the theme of death again, because again, these are elegies. And death is a core theme in Christianity as well, not just the reality of death, and Christians think of there being two deaths, the physical and the spiritual. We accept the physical and we seek to avoid the spiritual death through life in Christ. So a lot of Christian teaching centers around how we approach and understand our own mortality. And for us, if you are, you know, walking the narrow path, you're following Christ, then death is only a transition to the next life. It takes us from the material world to the spiritual world to await resurrection, both of our spirit and our body, and reunion with God. So, you know, we trust that when Jesus suffered humiliation and torture and execution, he took the weight of the world's evil upon himself so that everyone who believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. So through that lens, death becomes nothing to fear at all. It's just another beginning. It's not an ending. I think what I found so interesting about the Duino Elegies is that Rilke's writing is consonant with this notion that death is something to be reconciled with and even embraced. In his view, unfortunately, this was not taught by the churches of his time. In a 1923 letter, he wrote, "I reproach all modern religions with the fact that they have offered their faithful consolations and palliatives for death, rather than giving their minds the means of living with it and coming to terms with it." And so, as I was kind of pondering all this, it really brought to mind the way Søren Kierkegaard, viewed the state church of his time. Now, Kierkegaard lived about 80 years earlier in Denmark, and Rilke was Austrian. But they both lived in predominantly Catholic countries that had state churches, and Kierkegaard also was well acquainted with death and sadness. He lost most of his immediate family by the time he was 25 years old, and he didn't feel like Christendom answered his life's questions. So I found this fascinating article, academic essay, that contrasts Rilke and Kierkegaard, because as it turns out, Rilke actually did regard Kierkegaard very highly, and both of these figures were preoccupied with the affirmation of a fundamental decision and man's confrontation with dread. And they both approached this question in isolation, because they had encountered the suffering in isolation. Now, they actually find different resolutions to this, though. So with Kierkegaard, he ends up pushing beyond the aesthetic experience, beyond experiencing beauty in the world and, feelings, music. He strives beyond that, and he insists that you must make a choice. You must take the leap of faith towards God to find resolution to this terrible, terrible dread. Whereas Rilke comes across to me, especially in these elegies, as being just open to aesthetic experiences, endlessly open to them. And this leads to a multiplicity of choices, or as this academic writer puts it, a poetic conjuring in which the interrogation is more significant than the answer given. So, where Kierkegaard sought an answer and found his answer in Christianity, Rilke was more interested in the question and more interested in these transcendent experiences, not necessarily leading to a particular creed. There's quite a dramatic passage in the 9th elegy where he addresses the earth, and he writes, "Earth, is it not just this that you want, to arise invisible in us? Is not your dream to be one day invisible? Earth, invisible, what is your urgent command if not transformation? Earth, you darling, I will. Beyond all names I am yours and have been for ages. You are always right, and your holiest inspiration is death, that friendly death." So in this very strange passage, I would say, it's like he's making this commitment to Earth and the way that, like finding in life a friend in death, if that makes sense. And maybe that doesn't make sense. I'm not sure if it does, but throughout these poems, he's constantly suggesting that you must cede yourself, you must let yourself go and embrace and surrender to Earth and to the cosmos. Now, in so doing, I think you do have to lose your individuality, and Kierkegaard on the other side of this finds this realization slash redemption of individuality when you have a relationship with God and you have moral autonomy. So how does this really, what does this really mean for us? Well, if you take Kierkegaard's view, then being able to hold on to your individuality and to grapple with grief in the context of your faith, I think you can find, in my opinion, this is just my opinion now, I think you find a more fuller expression of consolation and meaning. There's a really great quote from Viktor Frankl, who wrote, "No human suffering can be compared to anyone else's because it is part of the nature of suffering, that it is the suffering of a particular person, that it is his or her own suffering, that its magnitude is dependent solely on the sufferer. A person's solitary suffering is just as unique and individual as is every person." And what a remarkable thing for a Holocaust survivor to say, that every person's suffering is unique and that his suffering is not, more suffering than someone else's who had a different horrific experience, but rather, it's individual. And we can find consolation in taking our individual grief and surrendering it to Christ. Because ultimately, and again, this is the Christian view, the Creator is the one who has made the world, has made the cosmos. And so to be truly at one with the cosmos, we have to be one with the one who made it. We believe someday that creation will be fully restored and reconciled with God. And that includes us as individuals. So I got a bit in the weeds here, but these are profoundly moving poems. And, if you're not that interested in the philosophy/religious stuff, you can appreciate them in just the way they express very basic human feelings: loneliness, grief for your lost love or lost loved ones, and this feeling that something grand and beautiful is always a bit out of reach. And then this encouragement to accept our mortality and be at peace with it. In the very last elegy, a wandering ghostly woman who is reminiscent of Eurydice or Dante's Beatrice, she leads a young man through the landscape of Grieving, which is a magnificent ruin of towers, flowers, and kingdoms. And this place is made beautiful not just in remembrance of the life that came before death, but also in reconciliation with death as part of life. And in the last stanza, he expresses this conflicting feeling of like joy and sadness, as this rising and falling of these catkins that hang in the bare hazels. And we, thinking of happiness rising, would find our emotion almost bewildering us, seeing a happiness fall. In these elegies, Rilke creates a somber place for anyone mourning to lose ourselves in contemplation of a painting or a fig tree, and space to weep as well. Christians can find divine comfort in this because every good gift is from God, and we can look forward to the next world. Death is just another phase, and in the next life we will be finally free and really achieve that transcendence that Rilke wrote about when we are reunited with Christ.